Here's an example of the kind of painting that you're going to be doing. So you're choosing a subject. You're going to do a drawing of that subject in your sketchbook, and then you're going to transfer that to a piece of watercolor paper, and you're going to paint it. Now, what I want to talk about a little bit is the background. Are you listening, Faith? Okay. So the background on this one, you can see it's a very sort of blurred background. So my daughter did this a couple years ago, and I really liked it, so I brought it in. And if you look close on hers, you'll see that it's done in colored pencil. So what she did was she zoomed in here. Let me just zoom in quick here if I can get zoom in. Nope, looking at the wrong thing. There we go. So you can see up close that it's colored pencil, okay? So what she did is she put her base colors down on the bird, and then she went over the colored pencil because she really liked the colored pencil. Now, in colored pencil, you can do this. You can go over it with something called turpenoid, which will actually dissolve the colored pencil and make it look a little bit more like watercolors, if you want to try that, okay? But she liked the look of this, so she kept it that way. And you can see what it looks like up close. So what we have here is we've got this bird that is pretty focused, and then the background, which is real blurry. So I'm going to show you how to do possibly a background like that, okay? Now, another thing which is kind of blows me away is we didn't talk about this at all, but when I take my golden ratio calipers, you can see the center of the bird is almost right there. And if I take it this way too, you'll see that the bird is up in this area too. So she kind of put the bird along that 5/8 mark here and the 5/8 mark there, which I like the way that looks, okay? Now, doing the backgrounds, I got a couple things that you can do that I think you're going to like, okay? First of all, with the background, I've got just several samples here of possible backgrounds that you could do. Now, how to do those? A couple things. I've got something that's called miskit. Miskit, okay, it's sort of a thinned out rubber cement. So what that would do would be this. Let's say that I wanted to do a bird and I want to do the background, but I'm worried about painting into the bird because I don't want the background to cover the bird up, because in watercolors it's hard to paint over the top of something, especially if you want the bird to be light and the background's dark, okay? So what you would do, let's just pretend that this is the bird here. I'm going to draw, let's just zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to draw a bird. And so just really lightly, let's just say this was your basic bird and he looks something like this, okay, and he had a little tail feather or whatever. So there's your basic bird, okay? Now what you're going to do is we're going to use this rubber cement, and it's called miskit. And I got a brush just for the rubber cement. And I'm going to brush the rubber cement over the bird. What it's going to do is, since the rubber cement is an oil-based product, it will repel water. So what I'm doing is like protecting the bird. And then later, after the rubber cement is dry, I can just rub the rubber cement off. Now, the only negative about this would be that the rubber cement, if you would go over where the bird is, you might end up protecting an area that you want to have the background in. Does that make sense? So you just got to make sure you stay within the lines. You may want to give it a double coat. It's most important near the edges, because that's really what you're trying to protect, are the edges. Now, when I paint the background, I'm still not just going to paint over the bird, but this rubber cement protects the bird. To understand, like I said, the only negative is it's clear and it's hard to see where you painted. So I just put that on there, and I'm going to let that dry. And you know rubber cement dries pretty quickly, so I'll just kind of fan that and let it dry, okay? Now, what I have here are some samples of different backgrounds that I tried. Now, here's a very muted background, and that's what's called a wash method. A wash method is you put water down, and then you add wet paints to that water. So I'll just do a little sample on a strip here that you can see. So, for example, if I take my regular brush now, and I like to use a big brush for the background. Don't use a little brush, because if you're going to do a big background, why would you want to do a little tiny brush? Okay? So I like the analogy of if you're scraping ice off your windshield, you got the choice of an ice scraper or a screwdriver. Screwdriver will work, but it'll take a lot longer. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is this. I'm going to put just water down. Now my water is a little bit tainted because it's a little blue, but I put water down first. That way when I add my colors, those colors disperse like that. You can see the way they'll disperse and spread into each other, okay? So if I was doing, let's say, clouds, you know, I might leave some areas that are white like that and then put some colors in there and the colors will sort of disperse. Got that? Has a real soft look to it. And that's really the benefit of watercolors, because it does things accidentally. You can't really plan on what you're doing. And when you think of nature, nature does things accidentally. If you're drawing a forest, you don't want to draw every single tree, but if you put variations of green in one area, it's going to naturally sort of spread out and spontaneously do things that look kind of natural. So you can see, look at the way this almost looks like clouds in here, and all I did was put water down, and then I just threw some blue on top. Now, the blue that I used, you can't see right here, this blue is blue that I mixed up out of my regular watercolor tray. This other blue is the concentrated blue that comes in these little bottles. So if you want something to be pretty dark, I would use the bottles. It's like using dye when you put it in food coloring. A little bit of dye really makes a big difference, okay? So for this, I chose these two blues. Now, doesn't that look awesome, that watercolor paint? Because I did a little wash method. So if you were going to do a picture of a bird and you wanted it to be against the sky, you might put the miskit down like this and then do that blue around it. But if you want to do a bird like the one that you saw my daughter do, then what you'd want to probably have is several colors mixed up, like yellows and greens and blues, because what it's supposed to look like is this bird is in a tree and there's all kinds of sunlight and forest and things behind that bird. So that way the things are kind of blurred. Like if you take a photo of a bird and the bird is in a tree, okay, what you're going to have is a variety of colors. So I'm going to try that on this particular bird, and I'm going to bring my tray in here so you can kind of see a little bit better. And what I'm going to do here is this. So there's my bird. I put the miskit on my bird. Now I'm going to take a little bit of water and just brush a little water. Now my water's a little bit green right now, and that's fine because I'm going to put some greens in the back here. And I'm going to just put some water down like so. I'm still not brushing right over this miskit, but I don't have to be so careful because I know when I get to the edge that the miskit's going to repel the watercolors. Okay, so there we go. And now I start placing other colors in there. Here's more of a, more of a lime green. Here, down here, I'm going to put a little yellow in this area. Maybe there's a little sky showing through the trees, so I'm going to add a little blue to some areas and do this kind of thing, and I'm going to have different colors behind that bird. And when this is still wet, it's really easy to soften up edges. Like if you say, well, I don't really like this transition right here from the blue to that green, so maybe I'll just put a little more water in there and work that out a little bit. Now, your paper is going to bend and bend a little bit because the water makes it bend a little bit. Not a big deal, though. The bending is pretty minimal. And later, when you put it on a mat, you can just flatten it out anyhow, okay? You couldn't obviously do this on thin paper that was thin because it would get all shriveled up. So that's called a wash method. If you want to put a wash method around the subject, and if you want to use miskit. And if you want to use miskit, I'm going to keep just one brush with the miskit, and in the miskit, it's in this jar. All it is thinned out rubber cement, okay? Now, this is one that I did earlier, okay? And after it's all dry, what you're going to do here is you're going to rub off the extra rubber cement. Now, when I do this, it's going to look like I'm doing nothing, okay? Because the rubber cement's invisible. But trust me, I can feel it right now, and you can see it flaking up a little bit. Let's see if I can zoom in there. Maybe I can't. Okay. So I can see that. Let's see if I can get it in there. Okay. You can kind of see it flaking up a little bit here. So I'm just rubbing that rubber cement off, because obviously if you leave the rubber cement on there, you won't be able to paint on there, okay, because the rubber cement will be repelling your paint. So there, I protected that area where the bird's going to be, which enables me to come back in there and paint that bird in more detail, okay? And the miskit works really nice, especially if you're doing, let's say you had skinny branches, and your background was like a dark green or greens or dark blues, and you want to paint those skinny branches, it might be good to put a little miskit down to repel the paint, okay? But you could still use white acrylic paint. You can still use some white paint to paint over those areas. Like if you had real skinny little lines, I wouldn't bother with miskit. I would just come in there with some white paint and paint those little lines. Or you might even have one of those markers that are white that you can come in here. Now this one's still wet, but once that dries, I'm gonna rub off the miskit. Got that? So what I would recommend is before you just do your background, like I love that look there, that looks good, you know, this one here, and I also like some of these other ones, but I love that. I love how brilliant those colors are, and I definitely love how dark these are. So it depends on the look you're going for, and what I would recommend is get a test strip like this and test it out, you know? Experiment and test it out, and you might go, hey, I love the look of that. Like I personally, I think this looks really cool. And that, once again, that was a combination of regular watercolors, okay, and the watercolor, the liquid watercolor that's that really brilliant dye, basically. Got that? So before you start on your background, do some experimenting, okay? And if you're really not sure, what I would recommend is if you're working from a picture. So let's say that this was the bird that you wanted to do, okay? And that was the bird you wanted to do, and you have a photo of that bird. In Photoshop, you could cut that bird out of the photo, okay? And then in Photoshop, take your brush and try putting different colors in the background to see what color you think would look best with that bird. So I use Photoshop like that all the time. If I'm not sure, I experiment in Photoshop because I can do it so quickly rather than committing my painting to some color that I may or may not like later. Got that? Any questions? Good, I'm pumped. Wait, can't